A single mistranslated word over dessert could decide the fate of $80 million. Crystal glasses clinked beneath low amber lights, masking a multi-million-dollar corporate trap designed to destroy a woman who had no idea she was walking into it. One exhausted black waiter, carrying a tray of dirty plates, heard the entire deception unfold in a language no one at that table expected him to understand. He had two choices: keep walking or risk everything to warn a powerful stranger he had never met before tonight. $72. That was the exact number that would determine everything that followed. Dante Ellison felt the receipt crumple against his thigh through the thin fabric of his apron pocket. The cheap thermal paper was damp with condensation from a dozen water pitchers he had carried across the rooftop that night. $72 was the exact out-of-pocket cost of Zuri's generic brand inhaler, the one she hated, the one that left a metallic taste on her tongue, that made her cry every time he pressed it to her lips. It was also, coincidentally, the exact price of the burrata appetizer currently balanced on the chilled porcelain plate resting on his left fingertips. The rooftop of Cielo occupied the 38th floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. The wind cut across the open terrace in bitter gusts, carrying the distant hum of traffic far below. The tables up here were reserved for VIP guests who wanted the skyline experience. It was also where Neil Buckner, the floor manager, permanently stationed Dante. The rooftop meant longer walks from the kitchen, colder shifts, fewer tables, and significantly worse tips. The indoor dining room, warm and softly lit, with wealthy regulars who tipped 30% without thinking, was staffed exclusively by white waiters. Neil never explained the arrangement. He never had to. In 14 months, Dante had not been assigned to indoor dining a single time. A dull ache radiated from the arch of his right foot, shooting up through his calf and settling deep in his lower back. His cheap faux leather shoes pinched at the toes, and the polyester blend of his uniform pants chafed against his thighs with every step across the stone terrace. He had been on his feet for 9 hours straight. His shift was supposed to end at 10, but the private party on the rooftop had decided to linger past closing. Only one table remained occupied, a round table near the glass railing. 3 people beneath a pendant light that cast their faces in warm gold. Dante approached with the appetizer, and for the first time got a clear look at the woman at the head of the table, Lena Kingsley. Neil had practically choked during the pre-shift briefing whispering her name, CEO of Kingsley Dynamics, a clean energy company she had inherited from her late father and single-handedly wrestled back from collapse. Up close, she looked bone-deep, exhausted. She wore a charcoal suit that fit like armor. But Dante noticed the subtle motion of her left thumb rubbing the joint of her index finger, a self-soothing gesture she probably did not realize she was performing. Across from her sat Aldo Marchetti, a silver-haired Tuscan mineral magnate with the quiet bearing of old European aristocracy, a signet ring bearing a family crest on his right hand. Between them sat Philip Crane, the translator, his leather portfolio open on the tablecloth, his smile as smooth as poured oil. Lena did not look at Dante when he set the plate down with a soft, practiced click against the heavy linen. Neither did Marchetti. Neither did Philip. Up here, on the cold rooftop, 38 floors above the noise and the life of the city, Dante Ellison was invisible. He was a black man in a white polyester uniform, carrying plates for people who had been conditioned from birth to look through service workers as if they were furniture. Lena leaned forward, her voice low and precise, despite the fatigue pulling at the corners of her words. She spoke directly to Philip, her eyes never leaving Marchetti's face. "Tell Mr. Marchetti that this rare earth mineral supply contract is my absolute priority. I am prepared to commit to a minimum 10-year exclusive purchase agreement. This is the foundation for our next-generation battery technology. Everything my company has built over the last 3 years depends on this partnership." Philip nodded with the practiced solemnity of a man who took his responsibilities very seriously. He turned to Marchetti and began speaking in rapid, fluid Italian. But what came out of his mouth was not a translation. It was a fabrication so precise and deliberate that Dante felt his stomach drop the moment the first sentence landed. "She is desperate. Philip told Marchetti in Italian, his tone shifting to something conspiratorial, almost pitying. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy. If you do not sign tonight, she will lose her position as CEO within a month. You can demand whatever terms you want. She has no leverage. Dante stood beside the table, pouring sparkling water into Lena's glass from a heavy silver pitcher. His hand did not tremble, but he felt his entire spine lock into a rigid line from the base of his skull to the small of his back. He did not learn Italian in a classroom. He did not learn it from a textbook or a language app or a semester abroad. He learned it inside the Signals Intelligence Facility at the United States Naval Support Activity in Naples, Italy, where he had spent 6 years of his life intercepting communications, translating intercepted phone calls and radio transmissions, and analyzing vocal patterns to detect deception. The United States Navy had trained Dante Ellison to listen not just for words but for intent, for the micro-hesitations and tonal shifts and breathing irregularities that betrayed a liar before the lie was even fully formed. After hours, he drank beer with Italian sailors in waterfront bars, argued about football in crowded Neapolitan trattorias, and haggled with fishmongers in the chaotic narrow alleys of Spaccanapoli. He spoke standard Italian. He spoke the thick Neapolitan dialect that sounded like a completely different language, and he knew, with the absolute trained certainty of a man who had spent 6 years listening to people lie for a living, when someone was fabricating information in any language on earth. Marchetti listened to Philip and frowned, his silver eyebrows pulling together with concern. He shifted in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him, and asked a follow-up question in Italian, his Tuscan accent heavy and deliberate. Her company is truly failing? Philip nodded solemnly, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with a gesture that projected reluctant honesty. I have it from an internal source. She is playing her last card tonight. If this dinner does not produce a signed contract, she is finished. Marchetti leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming slowly on the tablecloth. Dante recognized the shift in the old man's body language immediately. 6 years of reading people through intercepted communications and face-to-face debriefings had taught him to catalog posture the way most people catalog words. Marchetti's shoulders had drawn inward. His chin had dropped a fraction of an inch. It was not the posture of a predator circling wounded prey. It was defensive, cautious, fearful. And in that moment, Dante understood something that changed the entire shape of the evening. Philip was not helping Marchetti exploit Lena. Philip was making Marchetti afraid of Lena, afraid enough to walk away entirely. The question that surfaced in Dante's mind was pure intelligence training, automatic as a reflex. Who benefits if this deal dies? Marchetti replied to Philip in slow, careful Italian, his Tuscan vowels round and measured. If her company is sinking, I want no part of it. I have a family. I have a reputation built over 3 generations. Tell her I need more time to consider. The architecture of the scheme assembled itself in Dante's mind with mechanical precision. Philip was not inflating prices or pressuring for better terms. Philip was killing the deal from the inside. He was methodically poisoning Marchetti's confidence until the old man would reject the contract on his own, and Lena would never know why. She would walk away believing she had simply failed to make the case. Philip turned back to Lena, and his polished smile returned without a crack or a seam. Mr. Marchetti is very enthusiastic, Philip said in flawless, unaccented English. He simply needs you to confirm a few details about your financial position before we finalize tonight. Lena nodded, a microscopic release of tension loosening her jaw. She opened a leather-bound notebook filled with handwritten figures and began presenting data points, revenue projections, capacity timelines, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but every number razor-sharp. She was making the pitch of her life to a man who had already been poisoned against her before the appetizers were cleared. Dante poured wine into Marchetti's glass, his hands perfectly steady while his mind ran at full operational speed. He thought about the mechanics of the deception. Lena had hired Philip, but who recommended Philip to Lena? That question was pure intelligence instinct, drilled into him through 6 years of naval training. Trace the source. Always trace the source. Every compromised communication has an origin point. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He stepped back from the table and glanced at the cracked screen. A text message from Mrs. Tilly, his elderly neighbor and unofficial babysitter. Zuri was wheezing around 8. Gave her the medicine. She is hugging that bear you got from the thrift store. And she says you promised her ice cream tomorrow. Will you be home before 11? Dante stared at the message for 3 long seconds, the glow of the screen reflecting off his tired eyes. The generic inhaler. The one that tasted like metal. The one that cost $72 and barely suppressed the inflammation in her small, struggling lungs. The one she cried about every single night because the metallic taste made her gag. He needed a better inhaler. He needed this job to afford that inhaler. He needed to keep his mouth shut and finish his shift and go home to his daughter and pretend that the world was not rigged against everyone who looked like him. He slid the phone back into his pocket and looked out over the glass railing. Manhattan glittered below him, a sprawling grid of light and ambition and indifference stretching to the dark edges of the rivers. Somewhere down there, in a 5th-floor walk-up with peeling linoleum and a humidifier that rattled all night, his 7-year-old daughter was sleeping with a stuffed bear tucked under her arm, breathing through lungs that never fully opened. He stood between 2 worlds, one that smelled of white truffle oil and bergamot cologne and wine that cost more than his monthly rent, one that smelled of generic medication and boiled cabbage and cheap floor cleaner in a hallway that never got warm enough. Neither one belonged to him. The main courses arrived from the kitchen in a burst of fragrant steam. Sea salt-crusted branzino for Lena, bistecca fiorentina, thick and heavily marbled and bleeding at the center, for Marchetti, mushroom risotto for Philip. Dante cleared the appetizer plates and reset the silverware with practiced, invisible efficiency. His movements choreographed to be felt but not seen. As he leaned across to swap Philip's bread plate, his eyes caught the glow of Philip's phone screen, resting face up on his thigh beneath the edge of the tablecloth. A text message notification. The sender's name was visible for less than 2 seconds before the screen dimmed to black. Our gains. Dante read only one line of the message before the light disappeared. Make sure Marchetti walks. Board vote is Thursday. Russell Gaines. Dante did not recognize the name, but the words board vote Thursday handed him the missing piece of the puzzle, with the clean, decisive click of a loaded round sliding into a chamber. Philip was not a freelance grifter running his own scheme. Philip was a planted operative. Someone sitting on Lena Kingsley's own board of directors was paying Philip to sabotage this deal from the inside. The objective was not to help Marchetti cheat Lena. The objective was to make the entire deal collapse so the board could call a vote of no confidence and remove her. Lena was presenting a detailed 5-year deployment roadmap, her voice rasping with fatigue, but every figure delivered with surgical precision. Philip translated her words into Italian, but this time he added an entirely fabricated detail, slipping it in between legitimate figures with the smooth confidence of a man who had done this many times before. She is presenting well, Philip told Marchetti in Italian, but you should know something I have learned from an internal source. Her company is currently under investigation for federal environmental violations. If you sign this contract, you could be personally exposed to a federal lawsuit. Your name would be attached to a company facing criminal charges, environmental violations, completely, maliciously fabricated. Philip was no longer simply distorting translations. He was manufacturing false evidence to make Marchetti panic and flee. Marchetti set down his knife and fork with a deliberate clink. His face hardened into something closed and wary. He asked Philip in Italian, his voice cold and precise. Federal investigation? Why has she not disclosed this? Philip shook his head with practiced reluctance, as if the information pained him to share. Because she is hiding it. That is precisely why she needs your money so urgently. You are her last option. Marchetti looked at Lena with entirely different eyes. Suspicion, distrust, the warm engagement that had been building over the appetizer course was gone, replaced by the guarded caution of a man protecting his family's legacy. The deal was dying right in front of Dante, and Lena sat there presenting numbers to a man who had already decided to leave. Marchetti wiped his mouth with his linen napkin and muttered something to Philip in Italian, adding a throwaway remark at the end, his tone dismissive and casual, the kind of comment men made when they believed no one who mattered was listening. Strange also that she has one of those serving the VIP table. Says a great deal about how she runs her operation. Philip gave a thin, knowing smile and said nothing. Dante set the wine bottle down on the service tray. His fingers tightened around the neck until the tendons stood out like cables beneath his dark skin. He had heard that word, or its equivalent, in 4 languages across 3 continents. In a Naples bar, in a military briefing room, on a Brooklyn subway platform. It never got easier. But this time, standing on a freezing rooftop, the pain did something it had never done before. It burned through the last fraying thread of restraint that had been holding him silent. Dante retreated into the dark corner beside the service station at the edge of the rooftop. The wind sliced through his thin polyester shirt like it was made of tissue paper. He was shaking, and it had nothing to do with the cold. His military brain ran the assessment with dispassionate, automatic clarity. The situation was textbook. A high-value asset, Lena, was being actively compromised by an embedded hostile agent, Philip, and was approaching a point of no return. If Marchetti withdrew, the deal collapsed, and the board vote on Thursday would remove Lena from power. Standard operating procedure was clean and simple. Alert the asset, neutralize the threat, execute. His single-father brain ran a different calculation entirely. $50 in his checking account. Rent due in 12 days. Zuri wheezing through the night on generic medication that tasted like metal and barely suppressed the inflammation in her small, struggling lungs. 0 health insurance. If he opened his mouth and caused a scene at a VIP table, Neil Buckner would fire him before the words finished leaving his lips. And a petty, vindictive manager like Neil would make absolutely certain that Dante was blacklisted from every fine dining establishment in Manhattan. He would be back to flipping burgers at a fast food chain or hauling boxes in a warehouse for $9 an hour. And the next time Zuri had an asthma attack at 3 in the morning, the emergency room bill would destroy them. The last time Dante did the right thing was in the Navy. He reported a senior officer who had been using classified intelligence intercepts for personal financial gain. Dante had been correct. Completely, documentably correct. The officer was demoted, and Dante, the black enlisted analyst who had dared to report a white superior, was reassigned to a dead-end desk position. His promotion was frozen indefinitely. His colleagues stopped speaking to him. He spent his final 2 years in professional exile, while the system he had protected punished him for protecting it. Being right does not protect you when you are black and powerless. But he also remembered what Elena said to him 23 days before the cancer took her, her hand thin and papery in his, her voice barely above a whisper in the hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and wilting flowers. Do not let the world turn you into someone you are not, Dante. Promise me. He had promised. He had held her hand until it went cold, and he had promised, and for 3 years he had kept that promise by keeping his head down, keeping his mouth shut, keeping his fists unclenched, and carrying trays of food for people who would not remember his face 5 minutes after he left the table. But Elena had not meant it that way. She had not meant for him to become invisible. She had meant for him to stay the man she married, the man who reported corruption even when it cost him everything, the man who could not look away from injustice, even when looking away was the only rational thing to do. He looked at Lena through the glass railing. The tendons in her neck stood out beneath her collar. Her knuckles were white around the pen. She was about to lose everything she had built because she trusted the wrong person. And if the deal collapsed, Kingsley Dynamics would fold. Thousands of employees, engineers, technicians, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, people exactly like him, people with daughters who had asthma and rent payments they could not make, would lose their jobs and their insurance overnight. Philip opened his leather portfolio and spread the contract across the table with careful, almost reverent precision. Mr. Marchetti is ready to proceed. Miss Kingsley, Philip said, His smile stretched tight with barely contained anticipation. "We just need your signature on pages 12 and 28 to formalize everything we have discussed tonight." His soft hands held the pages flat, trembling slightly with excitement. But Marchetti was not reaching for a pen. He sat back in his chair, arms folded across his broad chest, his expression shuttered and cold. He was preparing to withdraw. He was rehearsing the polite Italian phrase that would end the evening. That was exactly what Philip wanted. All Philip needed was for Marchetti to say the words, "I need more time to consider," and the deal was dead. The board vote on Thursday would proceed without opposition. Lena Kingsley would be removed from her own company, and Russell Gaines, whoever he was, would get exactly what he paid $200,000 for. "Excuse me." The words left Dante's mouth before his conscious mind could fully calculate the catastrophic personal consequences of speaking them. His voice was not loud, but on the hushed, wind-swept rooftop of Cielo, in the intimate silence of the last occupied table, it landed with the force of a hammer striking glass. 3 heads turned simultaneously. Lena's expression shifted to flat, controlled irritation, the look of a CEO who did not tolerate interruptions from service staff. Marchetti frowned, his thick silver eyebrows drawing together in confusion, and Philip looked up, his polished smile freezing in place as a flicker of something that was not irritation but genuine animal fear crossed his eyes and vanished. "Is there a problem?" Lena asked. Her voice was pure Arctic ice. The CEO was back. The armor was locked into place. Dante stood with his hands empty at his sides, his spine straight, his shoulders squared. It was not the posture of a waiter. It was the posture of a soldier delivering a field report. "Ma'am, Mr. Marchetti is not enthusiastic about this deal. He is afraid. Mr. Crane has been telling him in Italian that your company is on the verge of bankruptcy and is under federal investigation for environmental violations." Not one word of that is true. Absolute silence crashed down on the table. The wind gusted across the rooftop, ruffling the edges of the contract and sending a napkin skittering across the stone floor. Philip shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the stone. "This is insane," he shouted, his voice cracking, the polished veneer splitting apart like cheap lacquer over rotten wood. "He is a waiter. He does not speak Italian." Dante did not look at Philip. He did not acknowledge the outburst. He turned to Marchetti and spoke in rapid Neapolitan Italian, his accent carrying the grit and music of Spaccanapoli, the cadence of a man who had not studied the language from a textbook, but had lived inside it for 6 years, who had argued in it, laughed in it, and used it to catch liars in dark rooms for the United States Navy. "Signore Marchetti, quest'uomo le sta mentendo dalla prima portata. La sua azienda non è in bancarotta. Non c'è nessuna indagine federale. Lui lavora per qualcuno nel consiglio di amministrazione di lei che vuole far saltare questo accordo." The Italian hung in the cold rooftop air. Marchetti's mouth fell open. His wineglass, half raised to his lips, stopped in midair and slowly lowered back to the tablecloth. He stared at the black waiter in the cheap white uniform who had just addressed him in flawless Neapolitan Italian, the dialect of the southern streets, not the polished textbook Italian of a tourist or a student, but the living, breathing language of a man who had spent years walking those neighborhoods. The collision between what Marchetti was seeing and what he was hearing played out across his weathered Tuscan face in real time. Then he turned slowly to Philip, and the surprise curdled into something ancient and cold and utterly lethal. "Tu mi hai preso per il culo tutta la sera," he said, his voice dropping to a register that made the crystal glasses on the table vibrate faintly. "Have you been playing me for a fool all evening?" Philip opened his mouth, but nothing coherent came out. The mask did not crack. It shattered. Lena looked from Marchetti's rigid, furious face to Philip's ashen one, and then to Dante. The speed at which her mind was assembling the pieces was visible in her eyes. "Translate what you just said to him," she commanded. "Then explain everything. From the beginning." Dante spoke without embellishment, without emotion, with the flat, systematic precision of a military debrief. He recounted each mistranslation in chronological sequence. The first lie, where Philip told Marchetti that Lena was desperate and her company was collapsing. The second, where Philip told Marchetti he could demand whatever he wanted because Lena had no leverage. The third, where Philip fabricated the claim about a federal environmental investigation to terrify Marchetti into withdrawing entirely. And then the final piece. Mr. Marchetti was also being deceived, Dante said. He was not refusing to sign because he did not want the deal. He was refusing because Mr. Crane made him believe that signing with you would expose him to a federal lawsuit. Mr. Marchetti is a victim here as well. Marchetti listened as Dante translated the summary into Italian. The old man sat in absolute stillness for a long, heavy moment, his jaw working slowly, his signet ring catching the light as his fingers curled and uncurled against the tablecloth. Then he looked directly at Lena and spoke in slow, deliberate Italian, each word carrying the formal weight of a man making amends. Dante translated, "Miss Kingsley, I owe you an apology. I was also deceived by this man. I did not know what he was telling you on my behalf. I am deeply ashamed." Marchetti rose from his chair, but he did not leave. He turned to Philip, and when he spoke, his Tuscan accent dropped into something that was not anger, but something far more devastating. The quiet, absolute contempt of a man who considered dishonesty a mortal offense against the soul. "Leave this table before I have you arrested." Philip grabbed his leather portfolio with shaking hands, knocking over a wine glass in the process. Dark red liquid spread across the white tablecloth in a slow, expanding stain. He fumbled with the clasp of his briefcase, his fingers trembling so badly that it took 3 attempts to close it. He backed away from the table, and as he passed Dante, he stopped. His eyes were filled with undiluted hatred, the kind of hatred that came not from being wronged but from being exposed, the fury of a man whose camouflage had been stripped away by someone he considered beneath him. "You have no idea what you have just done," Philip hissed through clenched teeth. "Russell Gaines will destroy." He caught himself, the name already hanging in the cold air before his brain could slam the door. But it was too late. The words were out. The damage was irreversible. Lena heard it. Russell Gaines, a sitting member of her own board of directors, the man who had personally recommended Philip Crane for this very assignment, the man she had trusted to help her find a reliable translator for the most important negotiation of her career. Lena closed her eyes for 2 full seconds. When she opened them, the exhaustion was gone entirely, replaced by something that was not anger, but something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Steel. Dante stood at the edge of the table, his heart slamming against his ribs, but his face composed and still. In his mind, the operation was complete. Asset alerted. Threat neutralized. Debrief delivered. Now came the part where he paid the price. He'd been here before. Neil Buckner came crashing through the rooftop door, his face purple with barely contained fury. He had watched the commotion unfold through the glass partition from the indoor dining room, a translator fleeing with a ruined briefcase. Wine spilled across the linen, raised voices at the VIP table. His VIP table, his most important account. "Ellison," Neil hissed, crossing the terrace in 4 long strides and grabbing Dante by the upper arm with bruising force, his fingers digging into the muscle through the thin polyester fabric. "You caused a scene at my VIP table? You are fired. Effective immediately. Get your things and leave through the service entrance before I call the police." He yanked Dante backward with a sharp, violent motion, pulling him away from the table in full view of both remaining guests. There was no attempt to be discreet, no pretense of professionalism. Neil wanted the guests to see this. He wanted them to see him handling the situation, handling Dante. "I always knew putting you up here was a mistake," Neil said, loud enough for every person on the rooftop to hear clearly. The word he did not say hung in the silence. Between the words, he did. Marchetti rose to his feet. He did not shout. He spoke in Italian, and his voice carried the calm, unmistakable authority of a man who had commanded boardrooms across 4 continents for half a century. "Release that man. Immediately." Neil did not understand the words, but the tone needed no translation. His grip loosened reflexively. Lena stepped forward, positioning herself physically between Neil Buckner and Dante Ellison. Her voice was low, controlled, and precisely calibrated to a frequency that left no room for negotiation. "Mr. Buckner, this man just prevented me from losing $80 million and 3,000 jobs. If you touch him one more time, I will buy this restaurant for the sole purpose of terminating your employment. Do you understand me?" Neil's mouth opened and closed without producing a single syllable of sound. He took an unsteady step backward, his face draining from purple to a sickly, mottled gray. Lena turned to Dante. She looked at his name tag first, then up into his face. She studied his tired eyes, the cold sweat drying on his forehead, the cheap polyester uniform, and the way he stood despite everything, straight and square and unbroken, the posture of a man who had been knocked down many times and had learned exactly how to stand back up. "What is your name?" she asked quietly. "Dante Ellison," he said. Marchetti stepped forward and extended his hand. Dante took it. The old man's grip was dry and firm, the handshake of a man who had built 3 generations of wealth with those hands, and who understood, at a level most people never reached, what it cost to stand up in a room full of powerful strangers and speak the truth. When Marchetti spoke, it was in the slow, formal cadence that Tuscans reserve for moments of genuine, deeply felt respect. "Ragazzo, hai più onore di chiunque in questa città." Young man, you have more honor than anyone in this city. Then Marchetti turned to Lena and spoke through Dante, who translated without hesitation. "I still want to sign the contract. But next time, Miss Kingsley, hire this man as your translator." Lena reached into the inside pocket of her charcoal overcoat and pulled out a business card. She held it out to Dante between 2 fingers. The gold leaf lettering caught the amber light from the pendant lamp above. Dante looked at the card, but did not take it immediately. He stood there for a long moment, the cold wind whipping across the empty rooftop, the distant hum of the city filling the silence between them. The night bus smelled of wet wool and diesel exhaust. Dante sat in the back row, his forehead against the cold window glass. His fingers found 2 objects in his coat pocket, the crumpled $72 receipt for Zuri's generic inhaler and the thick embossed cardstock of Lena Kingsley's business card. One represented drowning. The other was a life raft from a passing yacht. He did not trust the raft. He walked 4 blocks to his building. Inside, the hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and cheap pine cleaner. The apartment was barely 400 square feet. Peeling linoleum, mismatched thrift store furniture, and the low hum of the warm mist humidifier in the corner. Mrs. Tilly was asleep in the armchair, her head tilted against a floral pillow. Dante touched her shoulder. She blinked awake behind thick glasses. "You are late," she whispered. Table stayed past closing. "I am sorry." He pressed 3 crumpled $20 bills into her hand. She looked at his face, and her expression softened. "Zuri is better now. She drew you a picture before she fell asleep." On the kitchen table lay a sheet of construction paper covered in crayon. 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, standing on top of a building beneath a sky full of yellow stars. Zuri had drawn her father on a rooftop. She thought he worked close to the sky. After Mrs. Tilly shuffled back to her own apartment, Dante walked into the bedroom. Zuri was a small lump beneath a faded superhero comforter. Her breathing was steady, but the faint residual wheeze in her chest was audible. A thin whistling sound that never entirely disappeared. A stuffed bear from the thrift store was tucked under her arm, its fur matted, one eye missing. Dante stood in the dark doorway and listened to the rhythm of her lungs for a very long time. He placed Lena's business card on the kitchen table next to Zuri's drawing and sat in the rickety wooden chair beneath the buzzing fluorescent light. $50 in his checking account. Rent due in 12 days. No job, no degree, no corporate experience. But he had a phone number. At 8:55 the next morning, Dante stood outside the glass tower that housed Kingsley Dynamics in the financial district. He wore his only suit, navy blue, purchased for a funeral 5 years ago, shiny at the elbows. The security guard swept him with the look Dante had felt his entire life, the silent calculation that decided whether a black man in an expensive building was a threat, a mistake, or simply lost. "I have an appointment with Miss Kingsley," he said. The guard called upstairs, then looked back, with poorly concealed surprise. 42nd floor. Lena stood by the window of her corner office, styrofoam cup in hand. "I spent the night tracing Philip Crane," she said. "He received $200,000 from a shell company linked to Russell Gaines. Gaines needed this deal to collapse, so the board could vote me out this Thursday." She set a file on the desk. "Because of you, I have the evidence. Gaines will be removed before the week is out." She slid a second folder across the desk. "Director of Strategic Linguistics and Negotiation Intelligence." The salary was more than Dante had earned in the previous 4 years combined. "You do not need a degree," Lena said. "You need what you showed me last night. The ability to hear what people are actually saying when they think no one important is listening." Dante closed the folder. "I need health insurance. Not in 90 days. Active by midnight tonight. Comprehensive. My daughter has chronic asthma. Insurance today. Or I walk." Lena studied him. Then she pulled the silver Mont Blanc pen from her blazer, wrote an additional clause on the contract, and initialed it. "HR processes it within the hour. Coverage starts at noon." He picked up the pen. It was heavy, still warm from her hand. He signed his name. The ink was dark and permanent. 3 weeks later, the conference room on the 42nd floor smelled of dry erase markers and fresh coffee. Dante sat near the end of the mahogany table, wearing a tailored charcoal vest that rested perfectly across his shoulders. His feet were in supportive leather Oxfords that did not pinch. He was sitting. For the first time in his adult life, he was earning his living while seated in a chair. On the large display at the head of the table, Aldo Marchetti's face appeared via video conference from Florence. The rare earth mineral contract was being formally executed. $85 million, a 10-year partnership. Marchetti spoke in Italian, and Dante translated directly for Lena, in real time. His voice steady and precise. No intermediary, no one standing between them. When the final clause was confirmed and the digital signatures were exchanged, Marchetti smiled through the camera and added one last sentence in Italian. "Dante, the next time you come to Tuscany, the wine is on me." Dante gave a professional nod, though the corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. That afternoon, Russell Gaines was formally removed from the board of directors of Kingsley Dynamics in a unanimous vote. Dante was present in the boardroom when it happened. He did not speak. He did not need to. He simply sat in a chair near the corner of the room, and every person at that table was acutely aware of his presence. That evening, the office was empty and quiet. The sun had set, painting the skyline in deep, bruised shades of purple and fading orange. Dante stood beside the break room coffee machine, waiting for the pot to finish brewing. Lena walked in barefoot, her heels abandoned somewhere in the hallway. She leaned against the counter next to him and exhaled a long, heavy breath that seemed to carry the weight of 3 years of fighting alone. "They look at you and see a woman holding a checkbook," Dante said quietly, pouring coffee into a mug and setting it on the counter beside her hand. "They look at me and see a black waiter who wandered into the wrong building. They never bother watching the people they have already decided do not belong in the room." Lena wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic and looked at him. The exhaustion in her eyes met the hard-earned steadiness in his. They were entirely different people, operating on entirely different planes of existence, but they shared one fundamental understanding. They both knew what gravity felt like. They both knew the weight of carrying something that, if they let it fall even once, would bring everything crashing down around them. Dante left the building at 7. He took a cab. Not the bus, a cab. He asked the driver to stop at the pharmacy on the corner of his block before going home. The bell above the door jingled as he pushed it open. The store smelled of sterile plastic and cheap lavender soap. "Picking up for Zuri Ellison," he said at the counter. The pharmacist tapped at her keyboard, frowned at the screen, and looked up with surprise. "Your insurance file just updated. It is showing a $0 copay for the brand name steroid inhaler." She blinked twice. "This is excellent coverage. Is this correct?" Dante rested both hands flat on the counter. The formica was cold and smooth and solid beneath his palms. He did not feel the phantom ache in his lower back. He did not feel the suffocating pressure in his chest. He did not hear the hum of a fluorescent kitchen light at 2 a.m. while he sat at a chipped table counting bills that never added up. "Yeah," Dante said, and a slow, grounded smile spread across his face, entirely free of panic for the first time in years. "That is right. Give me the good stuff."